Okay, so um, you sent over this article about Anuel AA and Diddy, and wow, this whole thing is wild, right? Like, it's not every day we see a public feud like this. Two huge names in music going at it, and on Instagram Live, no less.
Yeah, and that's what makes this so interesting, right? It's not a press release, not some carefully worded statement. This is Annual AA, like raw and completely public, calling out Diddy.
For sure, and that's what caught my eye, too. For those who don't know, Anuel is big in the Latin trap scene, and Diddy, well, he's like the definition of a hip-hop mogul. So to see these accusations flying around, Anuel is saying Diddy tried to play him for a fool, using the phrase "me quería coger de pendej." It's intense.
Yeah, and this whole thing really gets at this question of power dynamics in the music industry. You have these established giants like Diddy and then rising stars like Anuel.
Yeah, and this all kind of revolves around Diddy's tequila brand. Apparently, there was some kind of business deal in the works. And we know tequila deals with musicians and celebrities. Those are a dime a dozen these days, right? And they can be super lucrative.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where the potential for, let's say, less than ethical business practices comes into play. Anwell is claiming that Diddy basically wanted to use his image, his platform, to sell tequila without a fair share of the profits. Anwell even used the phrase comprar la monte, which is basically like saying Diddy was trying to buy his loyalty.
And then on top of that, there was talk about a collaboration with The Weeknd, which, I mean, come on, that's huge for any artist, especially someone like Anwell, who is still on the rise.
Oh, yeah, a featuring like that can make someone's career. It puts you in front of a whole new audience, and we're talking about The Weeknd here. His fan base is massive, so to have that kind of opportunity and then to have it seemingly ripped away, yeah, I can see how Anuel would feel betrayed.
Totally. He even says in the article, creía que un bandido como yo.
Hmm.
Like, he really thought Diddy wouldn't try to pull a fast one on him, on a bandito like him.
It's all about the image, right? That bandito image, that's a huge part of Anuel's brand. Makes you wonder, is this genuine betrayal, or is there an element of playing it up for the fans? It's hard to say for sure.
Totally. Always good to remember with these celebrity stories especially. But let's zoom out for a sec. You've been in the music industry a long time. How common are these kinds of deals? Is Amaryl alleging something that is actually unusual or just kind of, business as usual?
Well, you got to remember the music industry is still a business. For all the creativity and art, there's still that business side. And anytime you have business, there are negotiations, power plays, and let's be honest, sometimes people trying to get a better deal than they deserve. I think what's unusual here isn't the allegations themselves, it's that they're public. Annual going on Instagram Live, that's a bold move. And honestly, it speaks to a certain level of frustration, maybe even anger.
Right, like this wasn't a calculated move, this was an outburst.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, is this just a one-off or is this part of a bigger pattern? The article did mention this whole thing happened back on April 12th of this year, and there was also that mention of Diddy's current legal situation.
Right. And this is where things get even more interesting.
Right, so for those who haven't heard, Diddy's currently under investigation for some pretty serious charges. And we aren't talking about like a parking ticket here. These accusations could have huge legal consequences.
Absolutely. And look, we obviously can't speculate on the validity of those charges. We're not lawyers, but you have to think about how this context might influence how people see this situation with Annual.
Exactly. It's like all of a sudden there's a spotlight on how Diddy does business. And Annual's accusations, even if they have nothing to do with those charges, it's going to make people look at Diddy differently.
It really makes you think, if Annual didn't speak up, would we even know about any of this? About this tequila deal? And even if it wasn't a fair deal, would it even matter?
And what about the cultural aspect of all of this? I mean, Anuel is Puerto Rican, and tequila is very much part of Mexican heritage. Could that be a factor here?
Definitely something to think about, especially with how important conversations about cultural appropriation are these days, particularly in the entertainment industry.
This is already getting complicated, and we're just getting started.
Well, what's interesting here is that we are seeing like this perfect storm of different issues, right? Business ethics, power dynamics, cultural appropriation, and then you throw in the power of social media.
It really shows how fast things can explode in the age of instant information.
And it reminds us that as fans, as consumers of music and pop culture, we aren't just passive bystanders. Our opinions, our choices, our likes, our clicks, they all play a role.
So how do we even start to unpack all of this? Where do we go from here?
If we really want to try to get a grip on all this, maybe we start by going back to Annual's decision to go public. I mean, this wasn't him calling up a reporter or, releasing some statement. This was raw, emotional, and in front of all his fans, his people, instantly. That means something. The fact that he trusted them enough to put it all out there like that.
That's a good point. Like, did he feel like he had no other choice? Like maybe this was it, the last resort, the only way he could think of to get some power back in this whole thing.
Right,
I do.
exactly. It shows you the power of social media, especially for artists who maybe don't have that same level of, clout as a Diddy. It's like they can bypass those old school gatekeepers and just go right to the people.
It's almost like, I don't know, is it too much to say it's a bit of a David and Goliath situation?
Hmm.
Annual using social media as his slingshot? I mean, obviously not literally.
You get it? But yeah, there are risks, right? Big ones. What if this backfires? People could easily say he's just trying to get attention, or even worse, trying to tear down a legend like Diddy. And even if his intentions are good, there's no guarantee that going public will actually fix anything.
True. It could blow up in his face, for sure. But on the flip side, maybe this is the only way this conversation was ever going to happen.
See, and that's what's so interesting, at least from an industry perspective. This whole thing, it's like shining a spotlight on how things really work, how power dynamics play out behind the scenes. You've got these hungry artists trying to make it, and then you have these established giants who pretty much control everything.
It's that old saying, it's a jungle out there, but this is the music industry jungle. And it sounds like Anna was saying Diddy, well, maybe Diddy stepped on his toes a bit, maybe even tried to take advantage.
Could be. We have to remember, though, we haven't heard Diddy's side of this. Maybe there were misunderstandings, miscommunications, could even be just totally different expectations about how this tequila deal was going to go down.
Okay, so how do we make sense of any of this
Yeah.
without, jumping to conclusions or taking sides?
Gotta look at the big picture. What does this tell us about the music industry as a whole? I mean, are these types of deals, are they always ethical? Should they be? And how can we create a system that's more fair, more equitable for all artists, not just the ones at the top?
That's a lot to think about, but I think you're right. Moving past the drama of this specific feud and looking at the bigger picture, maybe, just maybe, something good can come out of it.
Totally. And it starts with asking tough questions. Who has the power? Who's being represented? And who is ultimately accountable when things go wrong in the music biz?
Okay, so where do we even begin with all that?
Well, let's circle back to these tequila deals for a sec. We gotta understand why these deals are so attractive in the first place, especially to musicians.
Yeah, it's not just about the money, right?
Exactly. For a lot of artists, especially in hip hop and Latin music, where branding and lifestyle are so key, these deals are a way to do a lot. Expand their reach, make money in different ways, build a legacy. It goes way beyond just selling records.
So it's like they're building an empire, like what Diddy has done.
Yeah.
He's the perfect example of someone who went from music to a whole brand.
Right. And that's the appeal. But the problem is, it can lead to situations where artists, especially new ones, feel pressured to sign bad deals.
Especially if you dangle a collab with someone like The Weeknd. That's a big carrot to ignore any red flags.
Oh, for sure. Which is why what Anuel is saying is so important. Even if we don't know all the ins and outs, it makes you wonder, are these big players? Are they being ethical? Are they being responsible with their power?
And how many other artists are out there, maybe in the same situation, but they're too afraid to say anything?
It's a sad truth. The music industry, it can be brutal and everyone knows it.
It makes you think, if Annual hadn't gone on Instagram Live, if he hadn't been willing to risk everything, would this whole thing even matter?
Big question. Maybe it's about artists using their platform to speak truth to power when they see something wrong.
It also makes me think, as fans, as consumers, we have to be more aware. Think about who we're supporting, what brands we back. Are they using their power for good?
100%. Being an informed and engaged consumer, that's huge, whether we're talking about music, tequila, or anything else.
Okay, so we can't ignore this any longer. Let's address the elephant in the room, Diddy's legal situation.
Right. We've danced around it enough.
So how does that play into all of this?
Well, on the surface, you could say it's a totally different thing. But public opinion, well, it's a fickle thing. When you have these accusations from Anuel on top of these other serious legal issues, it creates a narrative, whether it's fair or not. And that can be incredibly damaging.
It's like it all gets amplified, blown up, and suddenly it's impossible to separate what's real from what's not.
Exactly. Reminds us that everything's connected. Context, it's everything.
So what happens now? What's the ending to this whole saga? It's like, who knows what's going to happen next in the music industry, right? It changes so fast.
That's the truth. Will we ever get the full story on this tequila deal? Who knows? And will other artists speak up? Will we hear Diddy's side of all of this? There are so many factors that could change everything.
And we can't forget about the whole cultural appropriation angle. We definitely need to talk more about that.
Right. Absolutely. I think it would be really valuable to hear from people in the Mexican community what they think about these kinds of deals. Is this appreciation or is it straight up appropriation? And how can these partnerships be done in a way that is, ethical, respectful of everyone's culture?
It's bigger than Annual AA and Diddy, you know. It makes you think about the entire music industry and if it's doing enough to be inclusive, aware of these issues.
Yeah, it's about having these conversations. Even if they're uncomfortable, even if it's awkward, we have to talk about it.
So where does that leave us? What are some big takeaways you want to leave our listener with after this deep dive?
Well, number one, don't forget that music is a business. I know it's easy to get caught up in the lights and the fame, but there's always that business side. So approach any deal in the music industry with a little bit of healthy skepticism.
Love it. Don't be afraid to ask questions, right? Do your research, and if something doesn't feel right, just walk away.
100%. And for the fans out there, think about who you're supporting, where you spend your money, your time. Are the people you're giving your attention to, are they using their platform the right way?
Be an informed consumer, basically, whether it's music, tequila, whatever.
Exactly. This isn't just gossip. It's not just about Anuel and Diddy. It's about power. It's about representation. It's about the influence of social media. It's about all of us.
Heavy stuff, but important.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most important conversations, they're the ones that make you think, make you uncomfortable.
Couldn't agree more. In the end, it's up to each of us, right? We decide what we believe in, where we stand, and we decide how we participate in these really complicated issues.
Well said. Hopefully this deep dive gave everyone a lot to think about.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what happens next with this whole saga and how it might change things in the music industry and, honestly, beyond.